Let's hear it from a man I thought was just an undercover cop, and a police officer, a detective. But today this man has two challenging jobs, being a pastor and being an officer. Let's hear it on the McDonald Show. So yeah, so never knew too much about you doing some work like this.
Right.
You know, I'd meet you at the gym,
Yeah.
and that's what I knew about you.
Yes.
What made you go into pastoring?
Actually, the call of pastoring has been on my life for approximately 11 years. The call of ministry has been on my life for well over 20 years. And the choice to pastor is not one of, or should be one of, the man or woman themselves. The choice to pastor should be a call to obedience to God.
This is a man I never thought that he could do a thing like this one. I'll call him an officer and a pastor in one. I'm sure everyone knows about the movie An Officer and a Gentleman, but this one is an officer and a pastor. Being a pastor
Yes, sir.
and being an officer, those are two challenging jobs.
Mhm.
You are a policeman.
Yes, sir.
Maybe we should talk about it before FBI comes to, to look for me. That why are you questioning one of our men, right?
Right.
So tell me about being an officer.
Well, being an officer was a lifelong dream.
Are you still an officer, or
Yes, I am still a police detective.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell us more about being an officer.
Well, as I stated before, it was a lifelong dream of mine to become a police officer. I achieved that dream in my early 30s and became a police officer and worked in just about every area of law enforcement, from the jail, which I started in the jail, and worked my way up to the streets and to serving criminal warrants, and finally to the police work, and then later moving into investigations.
I've known Pastor, before we go into Pastor, Thomas as an officer when he was with the Fulton County. That's way back,
Yes,
right? So we
yes.
come a long way, right?
Yes.
And at one time I thought he was just a workout partner, but here I am now talking to an officer. Being a policeman is a very challenging job.
Yes, it is.
What goes through your mind whenever you're leaving your house?
You know what? If I were to compare any two professions, if you will, I can compare being a police officer a lot like being a pastor. You never know what to expect. The job never gets boring because you wake up in the morning not knowing what's going to be required of you before that day is over. As a police officer, you wake up in the morning and in your mind you're going to perform the duties required of you as a police officer.
Thomas, but we see this on TV.
Right.
When you guys, are caught up in combat. Is that not scary?
As you, and I tell you, I'm so glad you're doing this interview because I'm going to show you how this relates to working for God. As you are trained to perform as a police officer, when the moment comes for you to perform, you do so without having to think about it. You do so because it's required of you and because you have been trained to do so. So at that moment, you don't think of the risk. You don't think of the possibilities of what can go wrong. You're only reacting to the training that you've received. And it's the same as a police officer. As I come before God and before the congregation to bring the Word of God, I don't think about what I'm going to say.
Did you think it's a big burden on your family? They are not trained. Especially your wife.
You mean being a police officer?
Yeah.
Well, I can see where it has been somewhat of a strain to certain family members, and then that also applies to the amount of knowledge they have of law enforcement as well. I would say it's more of a burden, if I look at it, more a burden to my mother and my sisters than it was to my wife, because my wife was more educated as to how I respond and how I react while I'm in my combat situations as they relate to law enforcement.
Listen, I'm not trying to interrogate officer here. So FBI, don't come to my house. You are an officer now. Later on, you told me you were a pastor.
Yes.
Honestly, from an officer to a pastor, what led you into pastoring?
What led me into pastoring is God, obedience to God. As you heard me speak today on obeying God, God called me into pastoring 11 years ago. He created the time and season for me to start. And that time and season I had no control over. It was at the time that God says, now you go. Now is the time to start. And at that very moment is when I dropped everything else. And the only thing that was extremely important to me was fulfilling the call that God had placed on my life to pastor.
How long ago was that?
Again, the call initially was 11 years. However, in April of last year, in April of 2012, God began to make me the man that He wanted me to be spiritually. When you fear God, as you know Him, and as many people say, I know God, but not many people fear God. But when God came to me in April of last year, April of 2012, and He acknowledged His presence by knocking me to the floor. And as I looked up, I said to Him, I would do it. I already knew. He didn't even have to say at that moment what He was there for.
Who was behind it? I don't think you just woke up early in the morning and said, oh, I have a calling here. Anyone specifically was behind it? Your wife, your family?
Oh, no. The calling, a true calling to work for God only comes from God. If you study the Word of God, Jesus Christ Himself, the Son of God, continually repeated that it was not His will, but it was the will of His Father who sent Him. God chooses each person. You yourself, you do a work on behalf of God, regardless of whether you know you do or not. Because in order to give, to care for others, you have to have the love of God. To go at it and make it something that is a priority in your life. So as you do what God has called you to do, I do what God has called me to do, which is to pastor.
This is a pastor of Christian Ministries and an officer again. I've noticed that at your church, you have different nationality.
Yes.
You've got the Mexican family there.
Yes.
How did you do it?
Well, it wasn't me again. It was God. When God showed me the vision of this church, as you see it, God showed me the way it looks now and the instruments that it has now. All the way to the sound system, to the plants and everything else. And God also showed me 3 nationalities of people, for sure. Eventually there will be a lot more than that, but He showed me 3 to start with: the Caucasians, the black, and the Hispanic. God also showed me that we will have translation during our services. And He prepared the person to do the translations years before the ministry started. He sent her from Mexico here to us, my wife and I, sent her to us. And we worked with her, we helped her, and she became a family member. And now she sits here in this church for God's purpose, to translate the Word of God to His people.
For the Hispanic families, Pastor Thomas's church has somebody who translates from English to the Spanish, so everyone can listen. Now, what was the reaction when your fellow workers heard that you were going to do the pastoring work?
Well, you know, as we live our lives in our own understanding, we do things that's contrary to God. And as you knew me for years and you saw me work, and I believe you even saw me work extra job at the club or the pool hall, and I'll stand there and be a security officer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
As I moved forward to obey God, God moved me into a spiritual place. And in order to be in that spiritual place and to communicate with God in that spiritual place, I had to get rid of myself. And I had to get rid of what people thought. And getting rid of myself included changing the words that come out of my mouth. It included getting rid of the joking. It included getting rid of profanity. And some people didn't understand that. But, you know, God showed me one morning, He said, don't you concern yourself with whether or not they understand. I will deal with that. So a young man came to me, as you know, I worked undercover for several years, and I would pretend to be someone that I wasn't.
I was surprised when I saw Pastor Officer in the gym at one time. I said, Are you insane? Is it you? Are you on crack or something? Go ahead,
Yes.
Pastor.
Well, as you're trained to, and there's also a bit of talent that comes with that, because it's a bit of acting that goes along with working undercover as a police officer.
Yeah, because I saw you with some bling blings here,
Oh, yeah.
all over,
Yeah,
and
had
so
my
on.
earrings
I
on.
almost ran away from you, man.
Yeah, my beard.
I thought he was doing crack. That's what I thought.
Well, and actually I was buying crack, and I was buying cocaine, and I was deceiving people. And in my mind, I was deceiving them for the right reason. I was deceiving them for the purpose of stopping their criminal activities. But one day I asked God a question. I said, God, even though I have to lie for the purpose of bringing justice, are you pleased with this? God very quickly spoke to me, and he said, all liars shall have their part in the lake of fire, hell and brimstone. And immediately, I realized that God was still there. In spite of me being other places, in spite of me having gone to other things and did other things, God was still there, and he answered so quickly that it got my attention. And I knew it was him, and because I feared him, I immediately started a campaign to get rid of the undercover work for myself.
Wow, that must have been a very difficult job to do.
It was, what was most hard about it was to persuade others that I needed to give it up. They couldn't understand it because I was so good at it. And they even went as far as to say to me, you know, you can't leave. We can't transfer you, because we need you to do what you're doing. You do a good job at it.
Well, you're not afraid that you were going to lose your job?
No. As a matter of fact, I had to quit my job to get rid of the undercover work.
But you're still an officer.
Exactly. Let me show you how God works. When you are willing to give up something for the purpose of God, he'll either give it back to you or he'll give you more than what you had before.
That is true.
So I went to my superiors and I said, you know what? I'm going to have to resign my position. And I asked God to give me something to do, and the Lord led me to purchase a big truck. And I purchased a semi-truck, and I thought that was going to be a means to retirement. But for God, it was a means to 6 months of being isolated, to hear him, to hear his voice, and to interact with his angels. And the Spirit of God came and rode with me in that truck. And his angels were there with me. And I could hear him clearly speaking to me. And at some point, the Lord said, now you can go back to where you came from. And he sent me back to the very police department that I left. And to prove it, God had the chief of police to call me on the phone and say to me, you can come back whenever you want to. And this was on a Friday evening at 8 o'clock.
God waits.
After hours. And the chief of police said to me, you can come back now or you can come back next week, but all I ask is that you come back within 2 weeks.
Wow.
That's the way God works.
Words of God.
Yes.
Do you preach to your people when you arrest them?
I've been preaching to people when I arrest them.
If you're driving you're saying the people like to call it popo cars.
For close to 20 years.
Do you preach to them when they're behind the seat?
Yes, when they're in the car and when they're behind the bars, when I'm interrogating them, questioning them when they're lying to me and telling me that they didn't do it and they weren't there. The number one way people confess, that I get people to confess to me, is through the Word of God.
It must be a
through
super call.
the Word of God. But the purpose is the same. The purpose is truthfulness. And teaching a person that they must be truthful. Because now the time has come where you have been called. You're in this situation. Now what's going to happen behind it? And sharing the love of God with these people at that moment keeps in them memory of me as a person. And they remember what I said as a person. And then they call back, or I later see them on the streets and they say, you know what? I'm so glad that you were the officer who arrested me.
Your church, this is the Christian Ministries. It's located on, what's the address again? The 2730 Mountain Industrial Boulevard?
Yes, 7 days of worship Christian ministries. We believe in worshiping God 7 days a week. And it is my belief that eventually this ministry will be open to the public 7 days a week. But we are located at 2730 Mountain Industrial Boulevard, Suite 110, here in Tucker, Georgia, 30084.
Any website?
Our website is www.7daysworship.com.
This is Pastor Thomas and an Officer Thomas on the McDonald Show. It was very nice to have you. I enjoyed your service today, and I'm glad. I wish many people can come and listen to his preaching. Remember, you have a cop preaching to you. Thank you, and it was good to have you on the McDonald Show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Officer.
Thank you.
Pastor.
God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Teresa and the church members, what do you think of your pastor?
A good friend of mine, Brother McDonald. Man, he has his own website, and we thank God for him coming out to film our services today.
Thank you so much. You're
And
welcome.
we praise God for you. We pray his blessings upon you and your family.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So what do you think of your pastor?
He's a great person, and I've been learning a lot of stuff from him, and helped me spiritual. And I just wanted to ask them in Spanish where they think about our pastor. ¿Qué piensa de nuestro pastor?
Creo que es una buena persona, apenas lo conocí hoy.
She thinks that he's a very nice person, and she just met it today.
Me gusta cómo explicó todo, no nomás lo leyó, me gusta cómo lo explicó.
She said that she really liked how he explained things from the Bible. He just didn't read it, but the way that he explained everything, she really loved it.
That's very nice. What do you think of your pastor?
Es la primera vez que vengo, pero también es una buena persona.
She said it's the first time that she comes to this church, and she loved the way that he explained the Bible and all the prescriptions of the Bible.
Me gustaría venir otra vez.
She will love to come again.
It's good to have you on the McDonald Show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Teresa.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
The Lord has said, and he has spoken to me. He says, my word is simple.
Entonces el Señor me lo ha dicho y me lo ha enseñado y me dice, mi palabra es simple.
In fact, his word is so simple
Entonces su palabra es tan simple
that some people can't understand.
que algunas personas no pueden entender sus palabras.
Because this world has made folks a little too smart.
Porque este mundo ha creado